Hi, my name is Adrienne Swindle, and I am doing my summary of the article titled Comparison of Mycotoxin Concentrations in Grain versus Grain-Free Dry and Wet Commercial Dog Foods. This article was published in the journal titled Toxicology Communications in December of 2019. So historically, commercial dog food diets have contained grain products such as those derived from corn, wheat, barley, and oats. These grains are an important source of carbs and fiber in commercial diets. In recent years, grain-free foods for dogs have skyrocketed in popularity. However, there are very few studies to support the purported benefits of feeding a grain-free diet. One of the proposed benefits of feeding a grain-free diet is a reduction in the amounts of mycotoxins that would otherwise be consumed if the dog were fed a standard grain-containing diet. Mycotoxins are produced by, as the prefix myco would suggest, a family of fungi known as filamentous fungi. So think about the fuzzy mold that you see growing on that loaf of bread that you've kept in your kitchen for a bit too long. These fungi are known to grow on grains that are stored improperly. These mycotoxins are extremely resistant to heat and chemical inactivation, so you can't just sanitize the affected grains. Acute exposure to mycotoxins can lead to symptoms such as liver damage, which results in anorexia, depression, gastrointestinal hemorrhage, jaundice, or seizures, whereas chronic long-term exposure can lead to conditions such as liver and kidney fibrosis, infections caused by immunosuppression, as well as cancer. Current regulations regarding parameters in pet food are based off of husbandry practices for livestock and laboratory animals. Both of these groups of animals are being kept alive for very short periods of time, unlike companion animals. Therefore, long-term effects haven't been studied in animals intended to live out the entirety of their natural lifespans. In this study, the researchers aimed to compare the concentrations of mycotoxins between grain and grain-free dog foods. Previous international studies of mycotoxins in dog food have found mycotoxins caused by the genus Fusarium to be the most prevalent and are mostly found in dry formulations. 5 different brands of food were sampled and were bought from different supply chains. All of the foods sampled were manufactured in the US according to federal guidelines. Formulations from each brand were selected to only differ according to the presence or absence of grain, not the other ingredients listed. 6 dry and 6 wet dog food formulas were tested from each brand, except one brand that only makes wet dog food, no dry dog food. A total of 60 dog food samples were tested for 11 different mycotoxins. Only the dry grain-containing foods were contaminated with mycotoxins. Furthermore, only mycotoxins produced by the genus Fusarium were found. Of the 12 dry grain-containing foods, 9 had at least one Fusarium mycotoxin present. The results mirror those of the studies performed previously in other countries. Each of the 4 brands tested contained at least one of the Fusarium mycotoxins, and 2 of the brands tested positive for all 4 Fusarium mycotoxins in at least one of the 3 samples. Only the dry grain dog foods tested positive for mycotoxins, but none contained aflatoxins. This is possibly due to successful regulatory measures that are currently in place. However, Fusarium-specific regulations should be implemented as well. Although toxic levels of mycotoxins were not found, a more in-depth study that focuses on companion animals' chronic exposure to low levels of mycotoxins is warranted. Dry dog foods, on average, contain more grains than wet formulas, possibly accounting for the lack of mycotoxins found in the wet foods and the corresponding higher numbers in dry dog foods. This is only an assumption, however, since the end products were being tested and not the individual ingredients themselves. Grain quality, not the grains themselves, is the likely culprit. Pet food manufacturers are known to use low-quality grain to cut costs and raise profits. This low-quality grain, which is often composed of broken grains, have been known to harbor mold growth more readily than intact whole grains. So some possible solutions to the mycotoxin problem include federal regulatory bodies could dictate that only high quality or USDA grade 1 grains be used in the manufacturing of companion animal diets. They could also require manufacturers to declare the grade of grains used in the ingredients list. So does this mean that grain-free food is the healthiest option for your pet? No. So there are studies being performed currently that are investigating the link between cardiomyopathy and dogs that are fed an exclusively grain-free diet. This information is not included in the study, but as a PSA for my peace of mind, please be sure that if you're going to put your pet on a grain-free diet, that the diet has been properly fortified and carefully formulated and includes taurine, which has been shown to be the link between cardiomyopathy and grain-free diets, a lack of taurine. So make sure your food has taurine in it, please. So where do we go from here? More research, extensive long-term research needs to be done, and it needs to be centered around companion animals. Research should also be done to investigate the effects of exposure to the different types of mycotoxins, to different types of mycotoxins versus only one type of mycotoxin. Research aimed at developing strategies to prevent the development of mycotoxins should also be performed. Regulatory bodies should give consumers the information that they need in order to make an informed decision about the best food to feed their pet. Pet food manufacturers, this can include declaring the grade of grains used in manufacturing on the product packaging itself, or regulatory bodies should stop manufacturers from using low-quality grains in the production of companion animal diets. As far as credibility is concerned, I do consider this to be a credible source overall. It does not appear to be biased. It does appear to be fairly impartial. The institutions that the authors are associated with are highly regarded and reputable. And the information contained within is relevant to the field of veterinary medicine, and it is pertinent and up to date. Some issues with credibility would include, due to financial restraints, the research is using a small sample size of brands of dog food. I would like to see a larger sample size of the brands tested, and I would also like to see a comparison based on cost of the brands used. So do foods that cost more, do we see a lesser prevalence of mycotoxins in those brands, or is it just as comparable to, say, dog chow and those lower quality dog food brands? I would also like to see a comparison based on the perceived quality of the product. So brands that use those marketing tools, such as listing their ingredients as human grade ingredients, do those human grade quote unquote ingredients actually contain fewer mycotoxins like you would expect to see from brands that use human grade ingredients? So therefore, they're not using the low grade grain that's deemed inedible or unfit for human consumption. I would like to see them compare and contrast brands that use tactics such as saying that their foods are made in small batches, higher quality control, etc., etc. All right, and that is the end of my summarization.